Okay, let's look at how to read from a file, specifically either reading one line or multiple lines. Now, this code is going to be similar to the kind of code you get in GCSE, which does mean that for reading over multiple lines in a file using a loop, there are better ways of doing it using a for loop. However, I'm going to be using a while loop in this example just because it's slightly closer to what you'll get in the exam. Okay. Because file handling is one of those topics you either get it straight away or you find it really complicated, I try and use a book analogy a lot because it's very similar to reading a book. So in order to read a book, you need to know which book you want to read first. So you need the name of the book. So I know I'm reading Harry Potter or whatever happens to be. As you can see, I'm clearly a Harry Potter fan. Not really. Then you have to open the book up as well. So you open the book up and then you can start reading it. The exact same follows for computers. So you have to know the name of the file you want to open up, and you also need to actually open the file first in order before you can actually read from it. So here's the code to actually read from a file. So in order to read from a file, I first of all need to open the file up, which is what this command open does. In order to open a file, I need to supply two bits of information. First of all, I need to supply the name of the file. So in this case, I'm calling my file text.txt. And then I've got to say my intention to the file. Do I want to read from it? Do I want to write to it? Do I want to append to it? Etc. etc. And that is what this bit does here. R is short for read. Then once I have this file handle, which is our way of kind of interacting with the file, I can then use that file handle to do something with it. So the first command we're really looking at is readline. What readline will do is read one line from the file. It only ever reads one line, and the first time you call it, it will always read the first line. The second time I call readline, it will read the second line in, and so on and so forth. So line will store the first line of my file. Now that is always going to be a string as well. So line 3, I'm obviously just displaying that variable, so it's just going to display the first line. And then finally, the file hand.close. Close will close the file, so you should always get in the practice of closing your files up. So like you'd close a book, you close your file. But notice that every time I am interacting with the file, I must use this file handle. So you can see every time I use the file handle. Okay, that allows us to maybe open up multiple files, etc. Now, I apologise if this just seems obvious, but you'll be surprised how many students, when they come to actually code this, will make this mistake. In order to get file handling working, you need two files. Okay, now that sounds a bit weird, but bear with me. You need a text file, and that text file contains what you want to read in, maybe be it name, numbers, whatever happens to be. That is separate to your code, which will be on a completely separate file. So your second file will be your Python program, like you would do with anything like a while loop or if statements or whatever happens to be. So you will need a Python file, and that is where you're going to put your coding, for example, the code that I just showed you. And then you can have a second file, which is completely new file, completely separate to your Python file, which is going to store your names, your whatever you are trying to read or write to. Okay, so as I said, this might seem really obvious, but the amount of times I've explained this to people and then they've gone off and say, well, what file do I read? We have to actually create it first, and they get really confused about it. So remember, you need two files. One file with your Python code in with a .py extension, and then one file with your values that you want to read in with maybe a .txt extension. Just as a side point, it doesn't actually have to have the .txt extension. It can have any extension. I always call it .txt just to make it really clear what it is storing. It's storing text, txt short for text. In order to make file handling work, the first thing you need is a file to read from. Okay, so here I've got a file called names.txt, and in this file I've got a number of names. I've got Annie, John, blah blah blah. Each of these names are on a separate line. Now that's very important for now because we are going to be reading in this file one line at a time. So let's go to this code, and I'm going to run this first bit of code here. So what's going to happen is, first of all, it's going to open the file up. So think of a file like a book. Okay, in order to read the book, you need to open the book up. In order to read a file, you need to open the file up. So I need to supply the name of the file, in this case names.txt, and as we know, that's the name of this file here. And then I'm opening read mode. Now R stands for read mode and allows me just to read from it. I can't write to it at this moment in time, I can only read. Now the file handle becomes the way we kind of interact with the file. So it's a bit like, you know, use your hands to interact with a book, and without the hands you can't really do much. So a file handle allows you to basically manipulate and use the file. It's not the file itself, it's just a way of interacting with that file. So once I've got the file handle, I can then read from it. So the first line, the first code we're going to look at is something called Readline. And what that will do is we'll read one line in only. And it always reads in the first line when you first call it. Okay, so in this case, it's reading in the name Annie. If I change the name Annie to something else, so let's go James, for example, and I save that file, then I go back to here and run it again, you can see it says hello James. Once I've read that line in, it will store it inside a variable called first name, and then I can print that name out. I then have this line of code here called file handle.close. What close does is it closes the file. So it's similar to when you finished reading a book, you'll close the book. With file handling, you have to also close the file as well. Now let's look at this second loop. So what we've got here is basically saying, well, whilst the first name is not empty, so we've still got a line of code that we've read in, we're then going to print the name out, and we're again going to read the next line. So when you call readline, what it'll do is it'll read a line in. Now Python will then keep track of where you got to. So the first time you call readline, it's going to print out James. The second time you call it, it's going to do John. The third time Sally, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to run this code and let's see what happens. Now I'll get an error and it says IO operation on closed file. Now that's a common error with file handling, it's why I wanted to show it to you. Basically it means that, well, we've opened the file here, but we've then closed it. And once it's closed, you cannot read it anymore. So this call to read line here is failing because the file is closed. So I'm just going to remove that there, and I'm going to run this code again. That will open the file up and keep it open. I'm then going to run this bit of code again, and now you can see it's doing it properly. So it's printing up hello James, John, Sally, Sakina and Zubair. Once it's finished with Zubair, it stops. And the reason it stops is because it's reading in nothing basically. So this allows us to kind of read in. Now, when we do call readline, it'll always read the next line in, which is why it's not saying hello James for infinity. It will always read the next line in. So it's time for a practice task. So what you need to do is take your text file that would have had names in it and just rename it, call it numbers.txt, and put a bunch of numbers in there. Okay, so as you can see, I've got a numbers.txt file, and inside that I've got a bunch of numbers. Okay, it does not matter what those numbers are, just shove them in. Okay, make sure that each number is on a separate line, otherwise your code won't work. What your challenge is to write a program which will read each of these numbers in one by one, add them up to a total and display the answer. Okay, now on this slide I have got some example code, and that's the example code that we use to read names in. You're going to use this code and you're going to adapt it, because you're still going to be reading each line in, you're still going to be assigning it to a variable. What's going to change is this bit here. You are going to no longer print it out, you're going to add it to a total. Just a kind of key point, because you're adding numbers together, when you read a line in from a file, it will read it in as text. So you must first cast it to a number, to an integer, and then add it. Okay, so have a go at this, pause the video, have a go, and the model answer is on the next slide. So let's look at the model answer. So I already have my numbers.txt file, and it's got a bunch of numbers in it. So the first thing I need to do is use my file handle and open the file up. So open numbers.txt in read mode. I then need to get the first number out. So I'm going to go file handle .readline, and there's my number. Now remember at this point that is going to be a string, so I'm just going to do this for a second. I'm going to go print type number, and I'm then going to go file handle .close. Now the reason I'm doing this is just to show you what the date type is. So if I run that, you can see that it comes back a string. Even though that's clearly a number, it's the number 4, the first line here. The way Python works is that when you read something from a file, it will just automatically assume it's text the exact same way as input works. So I'm just going to remove that line of code there, and let's start putting the loop in. So I need a variable total to keep track of the running total. Then while number does not equal empty, total equals total plus number. Number equals file handle dot read line. And then at the end of the code, I can print out the total. Now, this code is going to fail. Okay, I'm just going to run it just to show you why. Because it says unsupported operand int and str for plus. So basically what it's saying is you can't add a number and a string together. Well, here total is an integer. And remember, when we read from a file, we're reading it as a text. So number here is actually text. So I've got two choices. I can either cast it here or cast it here. Okay, so I'm going to cast here because it means I just have one less cast to do. So I'm going to cast the number into an integer, and then I'll add that integer to a total. So if I run this code now, you can see I'll get the total. Okay, so that is really important. Whenever you are trying to read a number from a file, you must first obviously cast it as well. Okay, to finish this off, here is a challenge task. Now, this challenge task is a little bit more tricky than before. You may have already written a secret number guessing game. If you have, this is an adaptation to that. If you haven't, well, here's a perfect chance to have a go at it. So, what do you need? Well, you need to have a file called secret.txt, and in there, there's going to be one, and I am really clear about this, one number between 1 and 100, whatever number you want. Then you are going to write a program which will read that number in first and store it as a secret inside your variable, inside a variable. Then it's going to have a game effectively where you have 5 lives. Every time you get the answer wrong, you lose life. You'll then ask the user who is playing your game for a number. If the number is too high, print it's too high. If it's too low, print it's too low. If it's correct, you say they have won. And then you keep repeating this, i.e. with a loop, until they've run out of lives. Now, I want to be really clear about this. You are reading one line of code in, so your file handling code will only have one read line. Okay, you don't need to put that into a loop. However, the code here, where you're actually asking the user to make a guess, that is going to be a loop, so you need to do that a number of times. The loop needs to end when you run out of lives, or you found the item. Okay, so here's the model answer. So the first 3 lines of code are simply reading the secret number in. Now, because we only have one secret number, we only have to do this once, one read line. So that's the reason why this is not inside the loop at all. If you put it inside the loop, you're going to get a weird answer, or potentially might work, but you'll be a bit more inefficient. But that's the correct way of doing it. Then I have 2 new variables. One storing number of lives that you have, and one as a boolean saying whether you found it or not. Then we have a while loop with a multiple condition. Now there is more than one way to do this. You could, for example, when you find it, just stop the program with an exit maybe, I have put a kind of boolean in there because it's a bit better way of doing it. So essentially, if you've got more than 5 lives and you've still not found it, then you will do the following code. Now this code that hopefully won't be too difficult. I ask the user for the guess, so it's a number. Notice also the secret number I've read in, I've cast to a number as well, because otherwise this won't work properly. If the guess is bigger than the secret, say it's too large. If it's smaller, say it's too small. Notice also I am subtracting 1 from the lives if they get it wrong. If they get it right, I say it is correct, and I set found to true. As soon as found is true, this will condition here will become false because found is true, so it's no longer false. Therefore, the whole of this becomes false, so the loop stops. Okay, so that is the model answer. It can be done in a different way as well. So as long as you get the right answer, it's okay. But that's just my model answer for you.